shall experience showers of blessings in our lives in the mighty name of Jesus. Shall we have our seat? We thank God for His faithfulness in our lives and what God has been doing. Today is Compasion Sunday. I don't know how many people have heard about compassion. If you have heard about compassion, not many people. Okay, so you will hear about it today if you have not heard about compassion before. And we have one of the representatives of the compassion team in our midst this morning. She'll be bringing the word of God, and then she'll be telling us about what they do as the compassion team. So we'll have the pleasure of having one of the members in our midst, and I'll call forward Steph Warren. Let's put our hands together as we welcome her.
Thank you. Good morning. It's lovely to be here with you. Oh, good, there's a clock. That will keep me on track. I always look up when I first get here. Thank you for inviting me to be here today to celebrate how you are transforming the lives of children. Is the first slide up? I can't see from here, can I? Can I? Could I have the first slide, please? Thank you. I've been a volunteer with Compasion for over 10 years now. One of the things I like best is going to Spring Harvest and New Wine, the Christian festivals, and talking to people about compassion and encouraging them to sponsor. Over the last few years, I've begun to come to churches to speak as well. And that is really great fun. I get to go to lots of different sorts of churches. 2 weeks ago, I was in a small Anglican church. In 4 weeks' time, I'll be in a Baptist church. So I see all sorts, but I love coming to RCCG churches. Although, if I'm honest, it is a tiny bit out of my comfort zone. I'm not a great dancer, but it does take me back to times when I've been in East Africa, in Uganda and Kenya and Rwanda. I've had the pleasure of being in church services there. So if I close my eyes, I can feel as if I'm there. So thank you. And I'm here to say a big thank you to you on behalf of Compasion. There are 3 children who are sponsored by people in this church. Could I have their pictures? Thank you. There they are. I don't know who it is in the church that sponsor. With all the GDPR and that sort of thing, I don't know. But I understand that there are 3 people in the church. They may be here today, they may not. You don't need to make yourselves known. If you'd like to come and chat to me at the end, I'm always pleased to talk, but that's fine. These are the 3 children that Compasion has as being sponsored by people in this church. If you do sponsor with Compasion and your child's face isn't up there, then please come and see me and we can get your child connected to this church if you would like that. Now, in celebrating what you're doing, not yet please, in celebrating what you're doing, I'd like to share a little bit of my story of sponsoring children through Compasion. And the first picture I have, thank you, next slide, is my picture of Amidou. The picture on the left was the first time I saw him, and his baggy shorts and his cheeky half smile there. That was back in 2010. And I decided to sponsor Amidou from Uganda. A year later, in 2011, I was out in Uganda and I got to meet him. That was our first time of meeting, and he greeted me, as you can see, with a huge hug. Because the church I go to sponsors a lot of children, we are able to arrange visits to go out there to see them. Obviously, that hasn't happened in the last few years because of COVID, but I have been out there to see them. Better get back to my notes so I don't just ramble. And Compasion partners with 8,000 churches, approximately, in 25 different countries. And my experiences are of East Africa, but I work in South and Central America and in Asia. And they are beginning work in 4 more countries as well. So that 8,000 churches, 25 countries, is a tiny bit out of date. But it's only in 25 countries at the moment that you can sponsor children. At the churches, Compasion set up what's officially known as a Child Development Centre, but we know them as projects. And they have a project director who's employed and lots of lovely volunteers. What would churches do without volunteers? Lots of lovely volunteers who meet with children, who go to projects on Saturdays, and they have aid group leaders and cooks that will meet the children and get to know them. They're expected to attend 43 weeks out of the year, and they go through a curriculum which is basically the same in every country, but with some alterations for different cultures. And the next slide shows your impact. So Compasion have worked out that for those 3 children, they have spent, since they were started to be sponsored, 2,756 hours at projects on a Saturday. I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a moment. They've had 962 nutritious meals. That's so important for these families living in poverty, that they get nutritious meals for these children. They've had 15 medical checkups. They will be given medical checks, both the children who are sponsored and their guardians, caregivers, whoever it is that looks after them. It may be that they are still with their mother and their father, or just one of them. They may live with an auntie, they may live with a grandparent. Whoever it is that is responsible for that child will also have medical checkups. And 9 Bibles are given out, or have been given out rather, to your children. They are given age-appropriate ones. So obviously as young children, they will be given picture Bibles, and then they will get new ones as it becomes more appropriate. But I'd like just to stress at that point that you don't have to be a Christian to be enrolled in a Compasion project. They will take the poorest of the poor, whether they have any religion or none. I'll come back to that again in a moment. Going back to Amidu, the next slide please. That first meeting in Uganda was at a project attached to a church in Mbali in eastern Uganda. You see him, he's got quite a sense of humour. He immediately pinched my sun hat and plonked it on his head, and was also pleased for me to take a photo of him with 2 of his friends. The boy on the right there, George, 2 minutes before this had been doing handstands and walking on his hands around the place, so he was obviously a bit of a character as well. The boy on the left, Ali, I've still had news of him. I'm still in contact with Amidu. He's now 24, and he's at university. And his friend there, Ali, was sponsored by a friend of mine, and he has done a nursing, nursing training. And I've just heard from Amidu yesterday that those 2 will be spending Christmas together. Ali does not have a very good background. His family are Muslim and have more or less disowned him because he became a Christian. So he is spending Christmas with Amidu. At the projects on Saturdays, they're given a chance to be children. That's one of the most important things, one of the things that they don't get really unless they are in a Compasion project. Their parents don't have the time or the energy to do things with the children. They're too busy living, making a living, getting by. But on Saturday mornings, they go to the project, and generally after a time of worship, they're split into groups. I'd have the next slide, please. This shows you some pictures. I've seen 8 to 10-year-olds learning the story of the Good Samaritan. I've seen teenagers learning some first aid. I've seen another group of teenagers learning about the Trinity with the visual aid of a lemon. And after their nutritious lunch, they take part in social activities. You can see in the bottom left there, when we went, we took a parachute for them to play with, which is great fun. And they have vocational activities too. The top right there, you may be able to see boys are cutting out basic sandals from old tires. Seeing those young teenagers with very, very sharp knives was a little bit worrying, but they were getting on very well. So that's the sort of thing they get up to in the afternoons. And I'll leave those up there for a minute so you can be looking at them while I'm talking. A couple of days later, after I'd met Amidu, I went to his home and visited his family. His father was there. His mother was not in the home at the time. The father had 2 wives, a Muslim wife, because he was a Muslim, and a wife who was a Christian as well. But I don't think either of them were living with him at that point. But we went there to his home. He had enrolled Amidu in the project because he knew it would be a great thing for him, even though he knew it was Christian and he was a Muslim. And as we've heard today, Jesus was a man of compassion. We hear a lot about compassion in the Bible. It's mentioned in Mark's Gospel at the beginning of the feeding of the 5,000. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. And the disciples there wanted to send the people away, if you remember. They hadn't got enough food for them, and they didn't know what to do. Jesus told them to give the people something to eat. The disciples saw the need, but they didn't know what to do about it. They couldn't. How could they feed 5,000? And don't we think like that sometimes when we see all the people in need on the television, the wars, disasters that we see? Our heart aches. We have compassion for these people, but we can't do anything. We think, what can I do that will help? But that one little boy did do something. He took his packed lunch, effectively, and Jesus was able to take that and share it out amongst all those people. And as I give my monthly direct debit to Compassion, I trust that God will be able to do something with that to bless these people. And of course, I'm going to ask you today, could you make a difference in the lives of children? If I could have the next slide, please. A life-changing difference, that says. Through their child development program, the support really does bring hope and change. It's £32 a month to provide all the things that you probably can't read in there. Some of them I've covered already. I'll just go through them quickly. School resources and uniforms. In many of the countries that Compassion work in, basic education is free, but you can't go to school if you've got and a uniform. So the money of your sponsorship allows them to have those things. They get medical checkups, as I've mentioned already, healthy meals, recreational activities. They get a chance to play, which they wouldn't have anywhere else. As they get older, they get Christ-centered guidance. It's important for these young people as they grow that the voices that are speaking into their lives are Christian voices. They get vocational training. I've seen girls learning to plait hair, which they love to do. A friend of mine told me just this last week that a girl that she's been sponsoring has now left the Compassion Project because she had got a job in a hair salon. So that's it, as far as Compassion is concerned, job done. She now has a job, and we will be able to lift her family out of poverty. And they have a one-to-one relationship with you, their sponsor. Compasion encourage the writing of letters. If you do sponsor, or if you choose to today, please, please write to them. If you find that writing on paper is a big effort, you can now do it through the app. Have the next slide, please. And that enables you to do it on your phone, or you can get an account on a laptop or whatever else you like to use, PC, tablet, and you can write from there. So you can do it electronically and send photos as well, which makes it so much quicker. When I was at New Wine last year, it was the 18th birthday of a girl that I sponsored in Uganda. And knowing she was older and would understand, when I got to the stand where I was going to be, I got somebody to take a photo of me in front of the stand saying about compassion. And then I went in my little camper van that night and I typed a little message on my phone, uploaded the photo, and maybe within a week she would have had this card explaining what I was doing. That's how quick it can be through the app these days. The timing of it depends very much on which country and how far they are from the centre of their country, how easy it is to get things to them. But that's the sort of thing that can happen. And just finishing off, in 2014, I received a letter signed not Amidu, but Amidu Daniel. A bit puzzled. But at the bottom, a project worker explained that he had been given the Christian name Daniel when he was saved, and he'd been baptized as well. And this next picture, that was taken in 2016. A couple of days later, I stood beside him in a church, this smart teenager, and said that he wasn't anymore just a sponsored child, but he was my brother in Christ. That was such a privilege. That is what can happen. Not always, but it can happen with children that are sponsored through Compasion. We know that as Christ's body, we're called to respond. And through Compasion, we have a highly effective way of making a difference. I have here, on the next slide, please, the details of Crop and Jiong and some others out on the table in the side there. They're eagerly awaiting finding out that they've found a sponsor. Jesus tells us in Matthew 25, verse 40, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." If God is moving you to do this, please come and speak to me afterwards. The next slide has details, and I've got leaflets as well with those details on, a QR code and where you can go to sponsor. Or as I say, I have children out there. And as you consider it, perhaps we could just watch a short video, please, of a man called Richmond from Uganda, where you'll see a little bit more of the difference that sponsorship can make.
My name is Richmond Wandera. I come from a country called Uganda. My mother was a very loving mother. My father was a very hard worker. But unfortunately, when he was murdered, everything changed for us dramatically. We ended up in a slum called Naguru, which is Uganda's worst slum. Naguru was dubbed the forgotten community. And life on the street was extremely difficult. The things I did to survive. Poverty robs children of the dignity of choice. I would have chosen school, I would have chosen food, I would have chosen health. When this Compasion staff member came to our home and told my mom that Richmond has got a sponsor, the amount of dancing that filled our home was beyond description. my sponsor began to write to me, and I felt known, I felt connected. They basically helped me become a child again. My pastor invited me to be part of the pastoral leadership, and I established the Pastors Discipleship Network. And so the Pastors Discipleship Network exists to train and equip African pastors. Right now, we celebrate God for 6,000 churches that have sent their pastors to be a part of our program. So what started as one decision to sponsor one young African boy has ended up not just changing the boy's family, but the boy's church and the boy's community. It's the best possible investment a person could ever make. The children that we see today will be around long after we are gone. And to invest in them, I can't think of any better investment. And so anyone who is thinking about sponsoring a child, do it. Do that, because you're investing in tomorrow.
So again, I'd like to repeat thank you to those of you who do sponsor, and also thank you to those thinking of it. Okay, that's the end of my slides now. Thank you. The theme of my church's Christmas stories, or Christmas services, sorry, this year has been the story. That's been all over our advertising. It's been painted on the windows. And we have looked at what's a very familiar story, isn't it? The story of Christmas, from different viewpoints. And don't we all love stories? Jesus knew that when he was speaking to people. He told lots of stories. Sometimes they were straightforward. Sometimes they were parables. We used to call those earthly stories with heavenly meanings, because there was always something behind them. But this morning, I'm going to look at a story that is probably equally familiar. The story we know as the Good Samaritan. I'm going to read it in bits as I go through from perhaps more modern translation that you're used to. So this is Luke 10, 25 to 37, if you want to follow it. The first few verses set the scene. Just then, a religion scholar, or expert in the law, some versions say, stood up with a question to test Jesus. Teacher, what do I do to get eternal life? He answered, what's written in God's law? How do you interpret it? He said, that you love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and muscle and intelligence, and that you love your neighbor as well as you do yourself. Good answer, said Jesus. Do it, and you'll live. So here we have a religious scholar or expert in the law, some of the versions say, the first character that we meet. And the idea here is that he's trying to trick Jesus or test him. What does he know of the law, maybe? But Jesus knows who this young man is. And as he often does, he replies with a question. How do you interpret it? How do you interpret it? What do you think of it? How do you understand it? And Jesus is pleased with his answer. But it goes on. Looking for a loophole, he asked, and just how would you define neighbor? Now, he looks for a loophole, or other versions say he tries to justify himself. Why does he feel the need to justify himself? maybe he was looking not for who his neighbour was, but for who his neighbour wasn't. Who could he ignore? Who did he not need to take any notice of? People that he didn't need to feel he should help. Jesus answers him with the story that we know well. Many people these days have probably heard the phrase, the Good Samaritan, but may not have a clue where it comes from. Jesus answered by telling a story, Luke goes on. There was once a man travelling from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, people listening to him would have known that that was a rocky, dangerous road. So the next bit wouldn't have been a surprise to them. On the way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road. But when he saw him, he angled across to the other side. Then a Levite religious man showed up. He also avoided the injured man. So there we have two religious people. We know that that happened from the story, but it's unexpected that religious people, a priest and a Levite, a temple assistant, did nothing to help this man. They walked past on the side. We can assume from the context of the story that the injured man was a Jew and therefore a neighbour physically to these religious leaders. I wonder what Jesus' listeners thought at this point. I get mixed reactions. There are explanations for their actions, or rather their inaction, but can anything really justify that? They may well have thought that the man was already dead and kept their distance to avoid becoming unclean. A dead body was one of the most unclean things in their culture. They wouldn't have needed to touch him. Just being near him, hovering over him, I think is the sort of expression that's in the Jewish, that they'd been anywhere near him, his impurity would have spread to them. I wonder how that ties in for us with the people that we're with. Do we spend too much time with people who aren't good for us? It's a difficult balance, isn't it? Being able to be with people, to be able to share Jesus with them, but not letting their impurity affect us. Going back here to this story, if those priests or the Levite had got near to the injured man, if he had been dead, then they would have required a 7-day purification process. And that would really have affected their temple work. So we could say we can understand it. Also, perhaps they were just plain frightened. This man had obviously come down the road, been attacked, and now he was lying there. What if those men who attacked him are still hiding somewhere behind the rocks? Maybe I don't want to stop and risk being attacked myself. So maybe that was a reason they didn't stop. But the Samaritan, travelling the road, came on him. Now, I could spend a long time going into the history of the animosity between the Jews and the Samaritans. Sorry, this microphone's cutting out more and more. Are you hearing all right? Yes, okay. I will ignore it then. Thank you. I guess most of you know, though, that the main point of this animosity was because the Samaritans had built their own temple, their own place of worship, and the Jews actively thought that was pagan, that they were worshipping God somewhere other than in Jerusalem. And by the time it got to the time of Christ, the Jews hated the Samaritans so much that traveling from Jerusalem, they would have crossed the River Jordan over onto the east bank rather than come down through Samaria. So that's the state it had got to. But going back to the story, when he, the Samaritan, saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. Other versions say he was moved with compassion, tender compassion. Luke says, he gave him first aid, disinfecting his wounds with wine, soothing them with oil, and bandaging his wounds. There's symbolism as well as practicality in these two things. The oil was used in the temple to consecrate, cleanse, and make holy. It also symbolized mercy because it was sprinkled 7 times on the sacrificial altar. 7 is a symbol of God's mercy. And also, practically, oil would have been soothing. Wine promotes healing. Alcohol is an antiseptic. If, like me, you enjoy watching some of these real-life programs of people being helped, if they're trying to do an operation of any sort out in the open air, the first thing they want is some alcohol to pour on the area to cleanse it. That's what the Samaritan was doing. Whether they really understood how good it was for what they were doing, I don't know. It may just have been a clean liquid. But there was some power in that wine that they were putting on. And then finishing this story of Jesus, then he, the Samaritan, lifted him onto his donkey, led him to an inn, and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins of his own and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take good care of him. If it costs any more, put it on my bill. I'll pay you on my way back." I wonder whether Jesus paused at this point to let the implications of that story sink in. What were the people thinking? Had he got through to them at all? But then he turned and asked the law expert, "What do you think? Which of these 3 became a neighbor to the man attacked by robbers?" "The one who treated him kindly, who demonstrated kindness and mercy," the religion scholar answered. No question, is there? That's the one. Jesus said, "Go and do the same." So that's the story that we know. And you may have been thinking that that's a bit of a strange choice of a story on my part to concentrate on just a week before Christmas. Why am I not telling you the Christmas story? But I'd like to suggest a link between that story and Christmas. And that is the unexpected. The unexpected. Religious men of the story, the story of the Good Samaritan, they didn't help the injured man, though that is what we might have expected of them. Perhaps we could say that their very religiosity, their status, the fact that they wanted to go and work in the temple again the next day, that meant that they couldn't open their heart and help the injured man. They didn't do what was expected. In this Christmas story, the religious men at the time of Jesus' birth missed it too. Matthew's gospel tells us that the Magi, or the three kings, went to Jerusalem. They went to Herod's palace to look for the one who has been born King of the Jews. Now, why did they go to the palace? The star that they'd been following and the prophecies that they knew so well told them clearly that the baby would be born in Bethlehem. So what are they doing looking for this baby in Jerusalem? They used their common sense, I suppose. They thought, king, palace. Let's go to the capital city and see if he's in the palace. That's what they did. The unexpected. Similarly, it was the unexpected people who first went to Jesus. The shepherds, the lowest of the low. People who couldn't wash, who couldn't keep clean in the ways that the Jews were supposed to. They were living out on the hills, doing their job of looking after the sheep. A really lowly job. But, Luke tells us, an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. No wonder, I think I'd have been terrified too. And then, not just one angel, it was as if God couldn't contain himself telling this good news, and a great company of the heavenly host appeared. All these people, all these angels, heavenly beings, telling these lowly, unexpected shepherds about the baby Jesus. And once those angels had disappeared, they hurried off to Bethlehem to find the baby. So I just want to say to you, as we get nearer to Christmas, let's be careful that we don't miss the unexpected Christmas. Maybe there'll be opportunities to find Jesus in an unexpected place, somewhere to worship him that you wouldn't expect, and to help others. And then finally, just returning to the Samaritan for a moment. We read a moment ago, in the morning he took out 2 silver coins of his own and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take good care of him. If it costs any more, put it on my bill. I'll pay you on my way back." The Samaritan paid for the injured man to be looked after. He clearly was not at home, he was travelling, but the implication there is that he came regularly. He'd got an account there, that he could put things on the tab, if you like. And he was known to the innkeeper. He gave some money to the innkeeper to do what he couldn't do. And making a last link with compassion, that verse was used by God to prompt a man called Everett Swanson, who set up Compassion back in 1952, to start the idea of sponsoring, paying other people to do what we can't do. I can't go out to Uganda and look after Amidu Daniel, but my money allows the churches in those countries to look after their physical neighbours. Thank you very much.